much. I want to talk about the different types of pain that you can experience as an amputee, and there's not just one type. There's a multitude, and they can all make a huge impact on someone's life in their ability to have relationships, their ability to engage in your rehab or your litigation, and for them to have any joy, particularly. So I'm going to talk quickly about pain. And there's a lot of really interesting, and I urge you all to go out and look at it, because it's just interesting, just as a point of conversation, about how pain isn't, as we perhaps originally perceived. There's a huge amount that occurs in the brain around our predictive coding. So the idea is that you may have had an injury at some point, but you can create that pain again by incidences or events that perhaps trigger that. And even though you haven't had an injury, you can repeat that same pain. There is also huge amounts around the idea of pain driving fear, and then that fear driving more pain. And your body can create that, or your mind can create that, and it is real pain. That isn't to suggest that those person hasn't experienced it, but there is a huge amount in that mind. But the most important thing to take away is that trauma, and all the stuff that Jan talked about, sensitizes somebody to pain. So that underlying trauma can really make a difference to how they experience their pain. And that danger signal that we've just mentioned. So the bit that gets mushed over in amputee care, particularly I feel, is musculoskeletal pain. It is very unusual for somebody to have an isolated amputation with no other injuries around the rest of their body. And there are lots of different ways that you can get acute musculoskeletal pain. The trauma of the event itself, but also, like Dr. Basu talked about, that huge amount about limb salvage. That can be quite a brutal process on your body. Even if you've just got the X-fix like Ruby had, the implications of how you try and walk for a year with an external fixator that doesn't allow you to put your legs together is huge, and that can affect your back, your shoulder. You can get neck tension headaches. The other limbs that are remaining also become totally overused, and we also always forget. They might write in a note, so, get shoulder pain, but nobody actually looks at it and why it's causing it. There are some amazing devices out there, crutches and things, that are much better at how we load through. And I urge you to have a look at some of them. And the final thing is, if you weren't particularly strong and fit and healthy before your accident, it makes it a lot harder for your body to accommodate that new difference in an asymmetry in having limb loss. So then you can acquire all sorts of issues around loss of static and dynamic balance control. And there's a lot of really good stuff working around hips, because generally in a lower limb, particularly amputee, your hip is what was remaining of where you control everything from, and your pelvis. And there's lots of work. If you imagine, like those people just come out of space recently and have lost all that control, the first muscles that we start to lose are our deep stabilizing muscles. So those muscles around our joints that control that positioning. So very important is our ability to be able to have column alignment. So when you put your foot down, that your hip and the rest of your body is over your foot. What we don't want is coming out to the side or going backwards or any other variation that people can create. And those will cause other problems. So that's really important to think about. They're doing a lot of fine things. I don't know if anybody's read this really great book, but I urge you to do it. It's not particularly well written. It's not a particularly great story. But what it does talk about is this man, I don't want to do a spoiler alert, but he ends up becoming an amputee. And I want to just quickly run through some of the passages that are written about it. And this is particularly about phantom limb pain. So he woke up in the middle of the night screaming, drenched in sweat, frantically kicking the foot that was no longer there. Sam was scared and ashamed because he had no control over his body, no understanding of what was causing the pain, and he felt helpless. And I really emphasize those words about feeling scared and ashamed, because no one else understands that pain that you're feeling, and they don't understand yourself. Why is it happening? And the final bit that was pretty bad, I think, is the doctor said to him, "Don't worry, the good news is the pain's in your head." That's really going to help you, isn't it? And then I really like this part of the story. So Sam, the character, said, "But I'm in my head." And actually, the pain seemed to occupy the spaces in his mind, which had been untouched and reserved for his creativity and his imagined endeavours. So he actually designs computer games. But the point is that if you say to somebody that's in your head, then there's no space either for that person's personality. So the big things we need to talk about is to demystify it, to make it acceptable and simple for them to understand, and to explain where it's coming from. So that's the book. In my personal opinion, the initial part of post-amputation pain, which is residual limb and phantom limb pain, is driven by the pure and simple fact that nerves, which run throughout our body, are extraordinary in a plastic, and they be able to change stuff. They really don't like being stretched, like a traction injury. They don't like being crushed, which is like a compression. And they also don't like being cut by a surgeon or by a forceful traumatic amputation. Okay? So that's the first thing. And the second point is that we know, because the human axons are so clever, they just like to grow and to regrow. We're not starfish. I'm really sorry, everybody. We don't regrow our limb, but our nerves do regrow. And as they grow, they put out growth cones. And the growth cones are like Hansel and Gretel, in that they're telling themselves where they want to go. So they're trying to find an occupation, a friend. There before, were there to innovate a muscle. Now it's not. So they're trying to find that other friend and start to work. And as it does it, it becomes leaky. So those nerves send out lots of exudate with these growth cones. And what I put there, really important, is there is an observable pattern to all of this post-amputation pain presentation. And almost every single person that I speak to who's in that acute phase says the same things. And that's really important to understand this driver. So the first thing they say to me is, my pain is generally worse in the afternoon and the evenings as I'm going to bed. So if we imagine, I don't know if any of you guys do exercise, but if you do a bit of yoga or something like that, or stretch in the morning, you'll find, like, oh, I'm quite stiff, I've been asleep and my muscles don't really work. But by the time you get to the end of the day, you'll find that, oh, I can touch my toes really easily. And we've lubricated, essentially. So we have had lots of vasodilation. So all our blood vessels, all the muscles have got lots of blood flow, and it's all expanded. And that same thing happens with the nerves. So as you imagine, over the course of the day, even if you're not on a prosthetic limb, even if they're just sitting in a chair, they're still dangling their leg down, they're still moving about, you will get vasodilation. And that is why, towards the afternoon and the evening, you will get more pain, because that leaky nerve is sending out more noxious pain signals. The other thing that people generally have is all amputees, unless you have had some new modern surgery called TMR or MPI, you will have an aroma. So it will be that your nerve has kept on regrowing, and as it's grown, it has hit either the end of your leg, scar tissue, or bone, or all of the above. I can do that very cleverly. When it hits that, it doesn't stop growing. What it does is it bundles up and forms a bundle of excitable neuromatter. So the analogy I use is, if you imagine there's a light switch, or hopefully there's some around here, and that light switch innervates the lights above us. And if we cut that switch would still have electric current coming out of it. So every time you brush past it, you would get that unpleasant shock, which is a bit like the phantom pain. So here's the next part of it. People generally describe a background noise of pain that's uncomfortable and pretty bad, described often as burning pain. And then they get what I call the wah-wah effect, all right? So the big whack, so pain, and then it comes off again, and wah, and it goes off again. And in that pain, that's sending off those signals a bit like being brushed past. You can feel it in your leg, the remaining bit of your leg, or you can feel it in your phantom limb. But the same signals are being sent back of this noxious pain. So, I think I'll go to the next one. It's not as simple as everybody's got an aroma and that's the end of it. There are also lots of other variations because it's traumatic that have happened. And I see quite often people who've had really severe traumatic amputations at the time. So I had some young chap who had his arm ripped off in a food mixer. and a commercial one, and he had huge, so the nerve that runs across the back of your shoulder blade, that had become unbelievably sensitized and angry. So every time he leaned back on a chair, he got raging pain because he had this huge traction injury. So you can't have that forceful amputation without having some of that. I don't know if many of you have heard of, it used to be a lot more present, but people having carpal tunnel syndrome, people use crutches, still get it quite a lot, but that same idea of that swelling, crushing effect can cause problems. And I see it quite a lot in, particularly above knee amputees, in the back of their legs. So often when they've had really aggressive femoral breaks at the same time as their amputation, that they often end up with lots and lots of scar tissue in their muscles. And where the muscles are now bound to the bone, also the nerve has got stuck. So they basically get an entrapment type situation and can cause problems. And there's the neuroma I was talking about, so that big bundle of nerve excitement. So there are all those acute parts that cause the pain. But what can happen is that your acute pain can become chronic, and you become entrapped with this part of the brain that I was talking about these repeated patterns. So you can get sensitized by, one, the injury, but then also by the trauma that's affected you psychologically. And I often describe it is like green goo in your brain, in that your memory and the trauma are often linked. So something that was quite benign and quite safe for you to do, maybe crossing the road or going down the stairs, suddenly becomes completely overwhelmed with fear and high anxiety that you can't rationalize, you can't explain, that's in your deep subconscious, unconscious brain. And that is really important to understand, that we're here to help make people safe and feel comfortable. So saying to somebody that your phantom pain is all in your head and not acknowledging them and not sitting down and talking and explaining to them why they've got phantom pain and what we can do about it can make it worse, and you can sensitize them even further. So the things that I think are really, really important in treating people with pain is to acknowledge and validate them and their symptoms, and not to ignore them, not to brush over, not to go, how are you doing today? And they go, well, actually, my phantom pain's really bad. And they go, right, okay, should we go and do the exercises now? Because that happens a lot. We need to sit with them and talk about that pain and acknowledge it and give them the space for it, using empathy and compassion, because it's pretty horrendous. And I often say to people that most people have had major events in their life and they will have known somebody else with it. You might know somebody that's got divorced, somebody that's had a baby, someone that's got married or moved house. All those events, you probably got somebody to relate to. Do you know anybody else probably has a life-changing injury when it happens? Probably not. And so that's that big thing. You've got no one to do it. So you need to be compassionate. The earlier we treat the phantom pain properly, the less likely it will become chronic. And actually, a lot of the time you can get to the point where they don't really feel very much of it. But you need to get in early. And you also have to do it as a holistic, interdisciplinary, biomyosocial approach. You can't just do it as a medical kind of, here's some medication, see you later. I hope that it gets better and you don't come mention it to me again, because I don't know what else to do. Isn't the answer. I think that's really important. Working with the psychologists, working with the processists, and surgery if necessary. So these are the things I talk about as a toolbox. Not everything for everybody works. You have to understand that we need to dip in and out of different things at different points to help people. I use a lot of desensitization techniques because what you're trying to do is get that nerve to calm down and to be less sensitive. If you've got somebody who's got that entrapment, you want to release the scar tissue so the nerve is now going to run freely and they can do it. You want to do lots of techniques about neural mobility, not just muscle moving, but also the nerves being able to move well. I've developed, I'm going to talk to you about later, but a system using electroacupuncture, which is the idea of desensitizing your neural system. If we understand that vasodilation is part of the problem, then it's really effective to use ice and compression in those acute phases when you've got lots of pain. So often wearing a line or wearing a compression sock or using a bag of frozen peas can be really helpful. I think it's really important. I hate the word mindfulness, and I don't know a better word to describe it, but I use all the time with my patients breath work. We use lots of grounding techniques. We do lots of work around going outside in nature, having joyful periods of time to manage those symptoms when they arise, so you have some control. Because if you have less fear, the pain is not going to become so bad, and also it won't become chronic. So you need those tools straight away, not just later when everyone's going, oh, it's chronic, maybe we should put those in. They need to be in straight away. And the pain reprocessing, there's some amazing stuff out there that we can talk. I mean, you could talk a whole day about that in its own right, but there's a lot of stuff we could do psychologically about helping people do that. And then I'm going to skim over it because the surgeons are much better about talking about it, but I work with the colleagues at the Birmingham Amputee Clinic, and we do actually a combined technique of TMR and RPNI. Essentially, it's two different ways to treat a nerve. So before, really scientific, right? The doctors, the surgeons used to find the neuroma, cut it off, and then grab the nerve, pull it as tight as they could, lean back, cut it, and hope it pins back and you don't see it again. Doesn't really work. The neuroma grows back, because what do we say? The nerve's plastic, so you just repeat the cycle. So what they've now come up with is that they put, I call it coaxing, so they put the nerve that they've got, so the tibial nerve that Basu was talking about, they would connect it to a smaller motor nerve that's in a muscle that you've denervated, so it's not doing anything, for hoping that those two would now join together and it's found a friend and it will not regrow. The regenerative peripheral nerve interface, told you Americans came up with that, is really simple. They cut a piece of nerve from somewhere, muscle from somewhere else, wrap it around the nerve so that the nerve now grows into that muscle. The clever people that I work with now combine the two, so you coax it onto a nerve and then wrap some muscle around it to make sure that there's no nerve endings coming off and fraying. It works really well when it's done appropriately and when you pick the right bit, and I think there's a lot of work being done about doing it, even at elective point of view of surgery, which helps with not getting so much pain. Oh, go the right way, Holly. So I published a paper quite a while, it feels like a while ago now, on electroacupuncture. I wanted to find a tool that worked to help my patients. I tried dry needling, it doesn't work very well at all. I wouldn't advise anybody to make any effort with that, it doesn't work. But by putting a small current through the needles, what you can do is you can stimulate all sorts of chemical changes in the nerves as they come into the leg and can help desensitize it. And it's really, really powerful. I think I found it even more effective with some of the people who have peripheral nerve damage, so like brachial plexus and things. It's extraordinary the changes they can have quite instantaneously with it. The big thing that's different is I do it for a whole 60 minutes, not just for the 20 like it has been done in all the literature. I do it at much higher intensity, and I also always reinforce people that you need to put it in the spine, because that's where it starts. Your nerves start in the spine, you do it there. And the other thing is, any physios in the room, please don't do the classic thing with, well, I'm going to find the nerves and I'm going to put them in there. That person will never come back to you because you'll have tortured them. So I just put them anywhere in the leg. And that's me in a nutshell about pain, hopefully. Sorry to be really cheeky. I just wanted to take 5 minutes to talk to you about the charity I set up last year ago, I think now, which is the idea about what happens after litigation and rehab when we all go away. And that is a point that is really important, because for me, a lot of the times, people really struggle at that point of who their identity is, what they're going to do with their life, and where they're going to go forward. And I always ask this question, very quickly, what is your kind of act of joy that if you lost would really impact your life? And a lot of people say to me really basic things like being a mum, playing with my children, being able to be a grandparent, get down on the floor, or cooking, or hanging out. Somebody said hanging out the washing last week. I thought that was really odd. But quickly, as a case study, this young man was a keen sailor. He was 9, and he had a terrible accident when his boat capsized, and the boat that was coming to rescue him took his leg off, above the knee. And The young man did go back sailing on one leg, and actually Rich and Naveen at Proactive got him on the first Genium, and he did brilliantly. He was doing really well. And I met him when he was in his early 20s. And everybody said to me, what a great example of success our rehab services have been. I would agree, up to the point that this young man was completely lost. He'd never got a job. He'd never had the confidence to go and do anything. And he sort of nervously laughed and sort of dotted around doing nothing, floating. So I sat down with him and talked to him through about what things would help to give his life back purpose and to give him joy and what he wanted. And one of the things he said was to sail one of these boats, which is a boat that lifts off the air and sails on just those little bits of, they're called foils. They're tiny bits of carbon, right? It's hard to do with two legs. I don't think I could, but he wants to do it with one. And so I was like, okay, we could do that. Luckily, my best friend is one of the world's #1 females in the sport. So that's her doing it now, Josie. So I phoned her up and said, Josie, would you come and be a mentor for this guy I've got? And she was like, sure, you do crazy things, Holly. I might as well join in, as always. And we sat down and she looked at what things would bring him joy and what it would look like. So the important things, they went through some goals and they agreed those steps with compassion. Her first idea was, well, Lawrence, you've got to stop smoking, you've got to go to the gym every day and you need to be an elite athlete. He laughed at that and we were like, probably not realistic just yet, and we have more steps to get there. But she did lots of work about building his confidence, his self-esteem, talking with other people who were in the still foiling, doing that stuff. And she brought contacts and opportunity. And one of the big things he said to me was he wanted to do more leadership. He wanted it to be a bit more doing a skipper and that stuff. So in 2003, he steered the boat that we took to Cows Week with 3 other amputees, and we came 5th out of 20 boats in our class. He did really well. We used to laugh, and I'll say this quickly, joke. So we would tack, which means you cross from one side of the boat to the other. And regularly there'd be a cry from one of them, Holly, I've lost my leg. And I would be, great, what do you want me to do about it right now? We're in the middle of the thing. And they had a great time. There in the middle, that is actually Lawrence. You can't see that he's only wearing one leg, but I don't know if you can see he's actually doing it with one leg. And the boat's up. He's not yet at the Nationals, but that's our goal for next year. But the point that I have is that his amazing achievement so far was that he phoned me at the beginning of the year and said, Holly, I applied for a job. And I went, right? And he said, I went for the interview. And I said, holding my breath. And he said, I was successful. I start in April. Josie didn't find him that job. Josie didn't tell him to get a job. Josie just gave him the confidence to be able to apply for that job. And that's what we're doing at Stride Forward, is matching people to other people who can help them. And it's not peer support. This is about what comes next and someone that talks your language. So for Ruby, it might be finding Ruby a nurse who works in her field and understands what she wants to do. Or I've got a guy who designed a computer game in his bedroom and he has a mentor with Xbox and he's taking his computer game to the designers. Or I have a patient who's a farmer and he was struggling to do his practice and he's now got a mentor that helps him improve his farming practices so that he can keep up with everybody else. So please do send any of your clients to us, anyone that you think that might like to do it. We're also looking for mentors if you have any family or friends that you think might be great. It's not too much time. And also, we are free to all, and I'd be really grateful if you would consider donating or talking to us about how we could work together. Thank you.